go from there. So, pardon the leg. Characteristics of the track become pretty clear in the right kind of light. Very easy to see. So the structure of the foot is very much like that of a greater primate, like a gorilla, for instance. But from some of the things I've noticed about how they use their feet and some of the mobility types of movement, it seems like they use their feet more like smaller primates do, actually, more like a rhesus monkey in some ways than a gorilla. For some reason, the 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 structure of the foot doesn't really reflect a gorilla's structure completely, because a gorilla's toe, big toe, sits all the way down here off the first tarsal, or metatarsal, phalange, your phalanges. But these guys sit slightly higher, more like a rhesus monkey. So to me, I don't think that these guys are related in any way to a gorilla, at least not closely, because a big toe is not set in the right position. So there's that. So overall, they've got incredibly long toes. They're very much like fingers. And these guys are curled over when he was moving, like the big toe was curled. And what you're seeing at the side here, and where it looks like it's divided, is probably a callus in this area, because it suggests a callus there. Sometimes you'll find these calluses peeled when they run across a rock. And sometimes you'll find calluses from up in these regions of the foot peeled as they run across rocks. Sometimes they'll actually sit in an active spot and they will peel off toenails that are like messed up, and they'll peel calluses. Jen used to do that. Not so much on the hands. You'll find fingernails, but they tend to leave the calluses on their hands alone, but they will peel them off their feet. This is another one that looks like it might have been a callus. So the fat pad is very similar to a gorilla's, and that does hold relevant. Now, they don't develop these fat pads until they lose their arches, at least not from what I've noticed. So when you're looking at a smaller track, like the really nice juvenile track, you'll have this beginning of the fat pad on the inside of the foot, and it'll push the soil or the dirt up and make a little half-round kind of dip. That's the development of this fat pad around the back of the heel. Now, this fat pad does not go to the front of the foot. They still have a ball, but there's a fat pad like a gorilla around the back side. Hey, how you doing? Leona? Afternoon. So that is something to note in foot structure that's very much like a gorilla. The other is because of the fat pads and because of the softness of their feet, there really isn't, even with this one that was probably 900 pounds. See how flat that footprint really is when you look at it? You've got just the slightest indentation from the heel. You've got a little bit of noting from the toes. But overall, they have what I call a washout print, meaning that the print is so flat that, the first rain, hard rain, will pretty much wash their prints out pretty good. The only thing you'll be able to find is like the little triangular wedge, typically, of dirt where their foot's, working like a hand. And then, you got a good brachial arch here. This one's very clear on that. A lot of casts don't show that really well. And the ball of the foot is really well shown in this one, which is another element that you don't get to see a lot in most casts. Ah, my camera. Sorry about it being fuzzy. So those are things to note. Now, this is very typically the red-haired Yeren track. Looks like this, and Skakkum's tracks look very similar. Guanche and Oma, they don't have a tendency to spread their toes as much, unless they're slipping really bad, and then they'll spread their toes. So I'm going to go on to movement patterns unless, you got a question or two. And I'll come back to this if anybody wants to look at it again, because I'll just put my book on top of it. So the things that I have noticed that are very peculiar is how they use their feet. They use their feet. Oh, come on. Come on, camera. Focus. There you go. They use their feet like hands. So Jen Jen used to pick stuff up with her feet, and she'd grab like this. She'd grab something, and then she'd just keep walking. And she'd make a really funny print. You'd find the stick print, but you'd also find, what looked like a handprint in association with the stick she was carrying. And sometimes she'd carry a rock between her two front toes, which was another peculiar behavior. And she'd walk with these items like, she's walking to the store with stuff between her toes. So those are some elements that you may not have thought of concerning how they utilize their feet. Now, when they come down and I've tried to include some track evidence, what they kind of look like. With the ones where they're holding the stick, sorry, my fingernails are dirty. I was out in the yard before and I didn't think about cleaning them. So, when they have a stick, sometimes you'll find the fingernail imprint. Or when they have a rock between their toes, you'll find fingernail imprints if you've got good, clean clay that they're stepping in. So, on loam hillsides, they'll have a tendency to grab loose ground with their toes. And I think what I can do is maybe just show you on the top of the cast here. So when they're coming down on a hillside and they're starting to slip, they'll grab the ground when they step. So right at the edge of a hillside or at the top of a ravine or any little edge to a creek, you have a potential to find a step like this. When they come down, it will pressure crack the ground still, or it will create a bump where the flat of the foot hits. But you'll also find the dig holes of the print toes, from them grabbing the loose loam to keep themselves from slipping. So you'll find these poor little funny marks in a hillside that you can't understand, and you'll have this big kind of oval flat behind it. I do have some pictures of a track like that. It was really, really nice. I'll see if I can find those pictures, and I'll try to show them to you. They're on one of my other phones. I'm going to have to go find it because it's not in my home. So, one of the things I wanted to note was some of the ancient descriptions. I keep talking about Alexander the Great and some of his information about them because he had contact with probably 5 or 6 different groups of ape people and dog people in India. And he noted them all in his personal journals. So you have to find his personal journals in translation in order to read the original. Don't rely on later references or writers that refer to them because they end up saying some really silly stuff. I ran across experts recruiting themselves talking about the ones that he ran across in northern India having bird foot. They're bird-like feet. Well, when you go back to the original translation, he's talking about this funny splay print over a hillside, and he mistakes the heel for a back toe because the individual had a very narrow heel. So when you take that into consideration, what you see in the field, very narrow heels sometimes with great big splay hands, you're just looking either at a really young juvenile who doesn't have enough fat or an emaciated individual, somebody in need of food, potentially. So the track will be, slightly different. It'll look like a great big bird track, like a chicken track, with one back and 5 forward. So let me turn the page on this. I've been having to reuse my book, so. Now the whole running on their toes with a clod of dirt, the track that's left will be either just little dip, 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 just the knuckles where they are running, knuckle edge. And then if they're using a stick or a heavier piece of clay clod, they'll actually go down on this section of their toes instead of on the knuckle, and you'll get a print more like this, just 4 with the thumb up. So if they're running with something that is not quite enough support, I think they do this to become quieter, because this is typically on loose ground that I find this, where you've got a lot of pea gravel, or where you have a lot of heavy loose gravel that's going to make a lot of sound. They have a tendency to pick their heel up, they grab dirt and run on either their knuckle, straight on the knuckle, or they will run on this section, the second section of the foot, toe, excuse me. And you may or may not see the back toe down, the thumb, because you kind of think of their feet as hands. They also strum their feet, which is a bizarre thing to see. I saw that once on my turnout. I had a Yaren male who used to watch me, and I actually watched him do this on more than one occasion. And I found sticks that he had run with. Some of them would be broken half because he, put too much pressure down and it'd break. And then he'd take a step or two and then pick up another stick as he was running. Or he'd grab, a clay clod, dirt clod, hold those in his toes to pat his feet. So that's something else to consider, and that is not like gorilla knuckle walking. Gorilla knuckle walking is just this. They're just curling their hands. They don't pick anything up. They don't hold a stick, and they don't alter between point and flat. They only do flat. So again, that behavior is not like a greater primate. It's unique to them. And some of the other things I have noticed over the years is they will, especially for juveniles, they will lay down little logs, like 4 or 5 inch logs that are just a couple of feet long to go across a riverway or a ditch, and you will find on those little logs grab evidence. You'll find pinch marks where they grab them as they walk, and you'll find them countered, So that's something to watch for. Anything that's been grabbed by what you think is a hand might be a foot, actually. So go ahead and consider that when you're out there. Hey, Justin. Which one of these cryptids has the break in the middle of the foot? As far as I can tell, they all do. All of the humanoid-like ones. All the ones that have fingernails. So it's the Oma, Guanche. Guanche look like gorillas. Omas look like chimpanzees. Yeren look kind of like orangutans. And then, let me think. The Ishka also have fingernails. They don't have claws, though they look like a baboon in the face. That's your Janoskwa. And then, one other. Oh, Skookum. Skookum also have this brachial arch. Dogmen do not, as far as I can tell. They go from, like, paw up with the heel up like a normal dog walking, or they can set their heel down, but I haven't seen any flex in the foot yet. Another thing I need to do more, I haven't really gone into a lot of dogman areas and done a lot of dogman tracking. I mean, I was around one for 7 months. I got to see what his feet did, but he was also in the accompaniment of like 10 other individuals that were all Oma. So, yeah, it's only the ones that have a more human-like characteristics and fingernails. They all have this brachial arch, and they all have this fat pad. The ones that have claws don't seem to have this fat pad, and some of those guys actually retain an arch into adulthood, and I'm not sure how they do that. Because the Gugway that attacked Jen, it still had an arch, though the one that we encountered in the redwoods didn't. So I'm not sure what was different about that one. But by and large, it seems the ones that I find that have the brachial arch are always the more human-like ones, the ones that you can trade with and interact with. Now, let me get on to a couple more drawings. So this is a representation of them, carrying a rock between their toes. Typically, you'll see it between the first and second. Every once in a while, I'll see it between the middle two. Sometimes you'll see them carrying 2 rocks. I've never found a print where they carry 3, but it's a possibility. So that's something to keep in mind. And you'll find like the little toe prints, and then you'll find the little rock divot in between, which is peculiar. Sometimes you might think that's a 6th toe, but it might not be. So keep it in mind that they might also be carrying something in their toes as they walk. Now, Ishka, the ones that look more like baboons, they'll actually wear a rudimentary sandal. And it's usually out of woven grass, and you'll have 6 points where it's fastened. So they'll have, like, you'll find maybe the knot impression in the bottom of the sandal. As far as I can tell, they use a cording that goes between the toes, they cross over the feet, and then they come behind and wrap and tie in front. The one sandal that was complete in the cave that I looked at had this same pattern, and that was how it was tied. It was crisscrossed and then crossed around the ankle and tied. You will, when they slip in these, because they use these in marshes a lot where it's muddy, and when they slip, you will find toe prints at the edge of the sandal. And there are examples. There's a pair of, let's see, where are they? Crater Lake Museum has 2 sandals that were found in a cave just east of Crater Lake. I think it was in the turn of the century sometime. They're 15, one's 15 inches, and I think the other one's 18 inches long. One's in good condition, and it shows the same pattern. And the other one's kind of eroded, it's falling apart. So we do have evidence of sandals like this, though we don't identify what wore them. And then the last thing that one of the last things I've noticed, and this one's, I can't down here show you a tree yet that has this kind of climb evidence on it. I'm going to have to go out into the woods. There might be a couple still left that didn't burn. But when they're climbing a tree, they grab the bark. And they'll use old growth trees in particular, trees that are good 4 or 5 feet in diameter. Because if they climb trees that are smaller than that, they end up killing the tree. I think they break down the outer bark too much, and the tree becomes a scrag pretty quick, in like a season or 2. So when they climb bigger old trees, you'll find impressions in the bark where you'll get the divots for the fingers and the divot for the thumb as they climb up. So those are always vertical lines up the tree. And then you get a secondary where you get what looks like half rounds around a tree, where they grab the bark with their feet this way, and it makes a pinch mark horizontally across the tree. And again, you'll be able to find, toe pinches and sometimes the cut of the foot. And I have seen one climbing a tree, so I was able to confirm that one. And I got one final drawing, and that is how they go across bigger logs and the track left behind. So they will walk a log by just kind of grabbing what's available, and the track that you'll get left behind will be a wearing off of the bark or the material on the log, and you'll get these little oddball kind of triangular shaped with a dink on one side, digs as they walk across. It's the log that I showed in one of my videos, I think it was. It had this sort of breakage on the bark, and that log was maybe 200 or 300 feet upstream from where I found all the stacked rocks and the little heart-shaped rock and the rocks under the bush and stuff. So it was in association with Passover, my guess is. Hey, Justin. In the past, I've seen what you call badger people. Oh, wow. And these Oma in the same, yep. They will interact with each other. So badger people, even though they have claws like bear people, they seem to be more amenable. Like dog people, you can't get them to trade with you, but badger people and bear people will trade with you. So I think their mentality, even though they have claws, is probably more human-like. And they do interact with the Oma and other groups because they all trade together. Like the little fishing hut down there at Cottage Grove Lake and the two sticks in waiting. I'm probably not going to find any track evidence in the creekway on the other side of the lake until he has his catch of fish and he paddles himself across the lake and goes up that stream because the stream is really low. So he'll have to carry from there. And, I'm going to wait. I'll go down and I'll proof it, make sure there are no tracks in it currently. I'll make sure not to leave any tracks. And then I'll come back as soon as, I figure out when it's moved, when he's not there fishing anymore. And then I'll probably find tracks on the other end where they found him in the trackway. And that was what, 2012 or 8, something like that, when that trackway was found. So those are the movement things that I have directly that I can give you images of. And then, their mentality. So let me try to flip this around. So, mentality. When I was out on my turnout, I tried to chase a urine down. I was really dumb. So I was on a pathway and I was following this stream. Well, it's a small river. And I was foraging. And I saw this individual hunkered down on the side of the creek, the river, because it's about 20, 30 feet across, maybe 10, 15 feet deep. And he was, scooping water with his hand, drinking like a person. And, my head, I'm like, oh, and somebody down here. I wasn't expecting somebody down there. And then, my brain went, wait a minute, he had hairy arms. And I mean hairy, like 3, 4 inch long wisps of hair. But, to me, he looked more like just kind of a naked guy sitting there trying to drink water. It took me a second to realize he was hair covered. So I turned and looked at him, and he looked at me because he realized I was there. I'd made a little too much sound on the trail I was on, and he noticed me. But he didn't come at me. His immediate response was just to look at me. We probably looked at each other for like 20 seconds. And then he kind of slipped into the water to swim across. Well, I had an exit point across the river, a log down that I could run across real quick. It was just a couple hundred feet back. So I beat feet back across that log as he was swimming across the river. And about the time he got up out of the river, I was maybe 30 feet away from him on the bank. So I was up on him. And he took off in the sagebrush, and he was hunkered down, like Johnny Weissmuller. The way Johnny Weissmuller used to run, he'd sit his body down at an angle and run like a Native American. And, bush runner, or what you call a sapper run, where you're running underneath cover and running through a tunnel. I could keep up with him, and he was a juvenile. He was maybe 6'3" or 6'4". I could keep up with him as long as he was hunkered down. And I kept up with him for probably 200 yards. I was a pretty fast runner in those days. And once he stood up, though, man, he got his stride. He was gone. I was like, hi, Roadrunner. I'm Coyote in the dust. And then he went immediately to high ground. He cut off onto a flatbed rock. And then he went around the backside of what you call a cake mountain, where you got an outlet or an outcropping of rock. And he went around the backside of it after he went across solid rock to hide his tracks. Went right up that escarpment. And he was up on top of that cliffside while I was trying to track him on the freaking rock bed looking for scuff. And I noticed him out of the corner of my eyes above me. Like, oh God. Okay, so I just made myself a target. So I turned around and I started backing out and getting out because I was headed into a little box canyon. I didn't want to be in that area if he was watching me. So I started coming back out of the canyon, and I went around the bluff point, and he followed me around that edge at the top, watching me the entire time. After that, I didn't see him on the ground anymore around me. He would almost always be up on that bluff. Finally figured out that was very close to where he slept. Just the next bluff over, he has a, woven basket, that big sagebrush basket that's like probably 20 feet across, oh, good 10, 15 feet long inside, 8-ish feet wide, and it's built right up into a cliffside. It's woven into branches above and wrapped around rocks above. It's all got a twisted entryway. It's really beautiful, and it's on an angle, the cliffside right next to it, and he sleeps in that at night. The area that he guards actually has a medicine circle in it set out in stones with a bunch of grinding holes and stuff on it. So uh, that's kind of humanish behavior there. Some of the other peculiar movement patterns I've seen, the way they swim. When he swam across the river, he was above water and just the top of his head. So he more or less swam upright in the river, and he scooped the water, as he was going across the river underneath. You could barely see a ripple. He just pushed the water out of the way, and you could tell he was kicking, but he was at an angle more like this than like this in the water, because there was no ripple in the back for the foot kick. So I'm assuming he swam upright, more or less, at maybe a 45-degree angle. I get some more questions here. In the past, I've seen what you call, okay, Badgerman, okay. Thanks again for your answers, and I've seen where they've taken limbs from trees and even tried to dust out their footprints, even in mud. Yeah, I've run across that too. There was a juvenile that I was tracking up in Washington, and he realized I was tracking him, and he started putting little branches in his tracks. He hadn't figured out yet to brush them out, but he was trying to cover them up, which I thought was very interesting. Other behaviors. Trying to think what I've seen. Oh yeah, we might think that they're very stable on their feet going up, 45, 50-degree angle mountains. Not necessarily true. The guanche, the one that I showed the baby picture, guanche under camouflage, and he's green. That area, that group used pegged in cross sticks up hillsides. So they'd take, poles that were 10, 15 feet long, 3-4 inches in diameter, and they'd use these great big round, like 1-inch, 2-inch sticks that were 10, 12 inches long. Sometimes they were 18, 20 inches long. They'd pound the sticks into the ground, and then they'd put the cross pole up any steep embankment. So you get 3 or 4 of these going up a hillside, and they're spaced 3-4 feet apart usually. I think it's because the young ones aren't very stable at first, so they require a little assistance. So they build ladders up hillsides. I followed those ladders. They're very sturdy. I took one apart just to see how it was done, to see how long the spikes were. Yeah, it'll hold me. It'll hold them. That kind of, you can weigh 200-300 pounds, maybe 400 pounds, and stand on a stick like that and not break it. If it were pressure treated something, you'd probably get away with 600-800 pounds on it. But sufficient for a child to move up that's juvenile. And juveniles. So the juveniles, you'll get odd movement with babies, and because they play with their feet. They do like we do. They play with their feet. So every once in a while, you'll find in like a sandy spot where it's like wet sand, or in a muddy spot, you'll find an area where a baby will have been sitting, and you might find like how a child will hold their toes and sit there with their feet together. You'll find that behavior with some baby Bigfoot. They will sit there and hold their toes. I think their toes get cold, and I think they're trying to warm their toes up. But you'll find the rump print, and you'll find the hands holding the feet and the heels down. So those are funny little behaviors that you might find prints of as well. And as far as, am I worried about, telling hunters this? If you are a reasonable hunter and you understand the legalities of hunting and you look at, the fact here in Oregon, Bigfoot's on the no-shoot list, for instance. You're not allowed to shoot him at all in the state, and you will go to federal jail. And in Washington, they'll put you in prison for life if it turns out the individual happens to have human DNA. So, and you get $1 million fine up there. So, something to consider. But hunters probably have way more contact with these guys than anybody else, other than maybe fishermen. Researchers, they go out in the field wherever they do their study, and they're familiar with one group. Hunters and fishermen will run across a wide variety, potentially, of different cryptids out in the woods, along streamways, around rivers. And in all actuality, I think hunters are probably more likely the ones that would have the ability to actually track and get film footage of anything like this, because they understand how to track, for one. And they're not fighting with their own mentality of whether or not it's a living or a breathing thing. They understand evidence has to be made by something. There is no question in their mind. So, for all you hunters, I know you have more experiences than you guys are ever talking about. I'm very aware of that. And, consider that you might be very beneficial to finding these things if you choose to participate that way. And I know you will at least be able to understand their behavior when you're in their areas because, well, you understand other animal behaviors. You can, for instance, delineate bear evidence from primate evidence, humanoid evidence, which is something other people might not be able to do immediately. Just thoughts. So, got any questions? Yep, they do a lot of stuff to help out their kiddos, actually. Some of the other interesting behaviors I've seen, like the family group that I got the picture of the juvenile baby, they had carried around a length of rope with them that they would tie in a tree so he could climb and swing on the rope. And wherever they were, they'd take that rope, and within like 200 feet or so would be their active sit. So I'd have to go find the blue rope hanging in the tree and then start looking for their sit. And they'd also make him a jungle gym. He was a very active child. So a couple acres away, I found what was it? It was an elm tree that had another tree placed in the top, so that you could climb up and then climb out. And I made a comment, because I'd seen guanche in that area multiple times. In fact, there's a high point in that area. It's up in Washington. One of the spots I got to go. There's a high point maybe 100 yards away from an individual that sits and gathers skunk cabbage. And mid-afternoon, you can walk up on her. And if you're quiet, you can look at her for 20, 30 seconds before she realizes you're there and walks off into the swamp. So she's a good likelihood I could probably film her, at least until she walks away. Getting into the swamp to find where the heck she goes, that's a little more difficult. I tried it a couple times, came out soggy. They go back into some sort of dilapidated wood area, and it gets really gnarled back in there, and you can't really find anything because there's nothing to track your deer in water. You have to look for hand evidence, and if they aren't touching anything, you're not going to find it. Okay, Justin, have you ever happened to notice that they're adapting well to outside towns like I've noticed, and even seeing... I've got to get my glasses. I'm so sorry. I don't know if there's so much adapting. I think we probably just built our houses in their homes. And I think the only adaptation they're having is whether or not they like our Christmas dinner, to be honest. I don't think that they are as skittish as we might consider. For instance, seeing carcasses where deer are frequently killed on the roadway, like coming out of Sweet Home. Oh, you're local. Hey, there's a lot of activity up in freaking Sweet Home. By the way, you know, Sweet Home, Pleasant Hill, Oak Ridge, all of those areas, Blue River, all of those areas have a ton of cryptid activity in them. And I don't think I think we have a tendency to not give deer enough access to, you know, crossing across a trail, a path, a roadway. We don't put any tunnels in or anything for them to go under it. And we don't put any kind of berm for them to go over it, you know, with any kind of a pass over. So, you know, I don't know as it would be Bigfoot that's scaring stuff out of the woods that way. It might be more people because they have a tendency to like to chase their stuff down. They do eat a lot of small stuff, though. They eat a lot of rodents, rats, possums, and when they munch on something, you'll hear them, you know, crunch, 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 and they'll leave the head behind. So the back of the body will be gone from, like, the neck down, or sometimes you'll find, like, half a body. They will leave the nose, and they'll leave the tail sometimes, and they'll take a bite out of the middle. So there's that. I'm not quite sure if you're referring to them chasing critters like deer out of the woods. It's possible. I noticed that there was a lot of that sort of thing going on down in Cottage Grove area between Saginaw, Cottage Grove. But then again, you know, deer have, you know, times of year that they prefer certain foraging areas, and as the weather gets harsher, they get down into the valley, and they're more prone to be hit simply because they're in new foraging territories, and, you know, could be unfamiliar to them. We only have a few deer in this area that like to stay up higher, but those are imported deer. They're a whitetail out of China that was here and let go, and they crossbred with some of our local deer, and they have a slightly like narrower neck and slightly larger ears and a slightly smaller white tail. They don't have that big flag that the our American deer have. Oh, taking them. Yeah, I've seen that where a body will just go missing. Um, Not uncommon, especially if their foraging area has been depleted. They'll take roadkill. I've seen that happen more than once. But usually it has to be fresh. They don't seem to like to pick anything up over maybe half an hour in age. So I don't think they're typically carrion eaters. I think that's a result of, I gotta feed my family now, and I don't have any other choice. A lot of the skunk and Yeren and whatnot in this area have a tendency to fish a lot. So I'll see like fish heads laying around without any carcass. So either you're dealing with a creature that eats the whole body and just leaves the fish head, and it's not a cut type of thing where you cut it off and cut the tail off and you're skinning it. The tail's always gone, the fins are always gone, and you'll find a half-round bite mark where the head was. So there's that. And I know that that's urine behavior. And I know they, you know, do sushi. They don't cook those. Those are eaten raw. seen them in the wintertime, sitting even just out of the view in, coming out of Sweet Home, waiting to go collect deer. Yep. Yeah, that I've just up the roadway here about 2 months ago. The Google vehicle came through to take road pictures, and got 2 screenshots of the Google car having caught them, and Google putting a smear print over the top. There's this one side of a foot you can see, and the front of another foot in one, and then the other one they did a little better job. You just kind of get the visual reference that something had been sitting there, and you smear color, blurred, and that was just 3/4 of a mile up the road from me. And there's hiking trails up there. That's actually one of the hiking trails I've been wanting to go on for quite some time. I haven't gone up there. I've had people tell me there's critters up there, and that they've had interactions, they've seen stuff. It's not uncommon to actually see them sitting along a roadside. When I was a kid, I would watch as my mom was driving. I'd watch out the window of our vehicle, just so I could see how many I could count in a day. And on average, I could count 6 or 7. And they'd either be sitting, as you were, driving around a road and you come where there's a little berm down, they'd sit just below that advantage point where you could see them. So you could just see the top of their head usually, or maybe their shoulder. And then the other types of things, you'd see them peeking from behind trees, looking downhill at you as you drove. Or I would see them up on ridge lines, sitting, foraging. Sometimes I'd see them sitting next to rotten stumps up on hillsides as we were driving. Or I'd find them at the edge of a, tree line in a clearing, sitting, looking at you. So yeah, if you got a camera pointed out the side of your vehicle, you're actually probably going to catch quite a few of them up in the Sweet Home area doing exactly what you're talking about, because I've seen it happen. And actually, that'd be probably a really great way to get some footage. Just film out that side of your vehicle, because you will catch them. They will sit for hours at a time foraging. If they're not, actually looking for particular things and they're sitting there eating termites or munching, they'll just sit in the sun and do their thing. So if you figure out where they're sitting and doing that, they're going to habitually be there. They're year round. They don't migrate. They don't go anywhere. So if they got a comfortable spot, and they don't think that you notice them, you'll be able to get lots of footage that way. How can you get people to come out of their disconnect when they see them walking upright, as my brother refers to them as flat-faced bears? Flat-faced bears. Well, the fear factor. One of the things I've noticed, if I show my photos to hunters, they can immediately see what's in the photo, and you'll get one of two reactions. Either they'll go, oh yeah, I've seen those, or you get the, oh God, they really do exist, I'm fucked mentality. So when you're getting a person who's saying, oh, I'm seeing a flat-faced bear, maybe challenge them. Hey, where do you see a flat-faced bear in a book? Can you show it to me? Because I don't know what this thing looks like. Can you show me in a book? You might have to make them prove it to themselves that they can't find the thing they claim they see. And then, they're going to have to face what they saw. Other than that, I'm not quite sure. Maybe get enough pictures of them to go, hey, this is not what you think it is. But, you're going to have to maybe get them to challenge their own mentality. Because that's the other thing. We've, for so many hundreds of years, we've claimed that these people are mythical and don't exist. It's an easy out. But I don't think we're going to have much more of a choice here soon, with as much as we're developing and as many of them as I'm seeing come through towns, foraging in our garbage cans. We're going to probably start seeing more of that. as we encroach more on them. They aren't like other animals. They aren't going to leave the territory just because we moved in. They'll just adapt and continue doing what they've always done. That's why you can find so much evidence in towns and in parks, etc. It's because we just inhabited on top of them. For instance, everything that my dad experienced up and down the Willamette River, all of the encounters that he had back in the 30s, those positions, places that he told me about, the creatures are still there. They never moved. But, we've now built roadways, and we have bridges and homes in their same territory, but they've never left. You can't force them out like a chimpanzee or gorilla by removing their food sources. And the reason is they're not an animal. If we are removed of our food sources, we're not going to leave our home. We'll just go forage for food and come back to our home. And they have that same mentality. So I don't think we can control them like animals. I think we actually have to try to understand them in order to get along with them and to identify the ones that are potentially dangerous instead of assuming that they're all dangerous just because they're big and scary. And that was, when I was a child, I tried to introduce some of my younger relatives that were my same age to Jen. Scared them half to death. You know, I'd been around her, it didn't bother me, but, my relative, she was too big, startled them. There was another child in the property that actually played with Jen, another girl who was aware of her, and we girls didn't have any problems with her. But the boys that I tried to introduce her to all were terrified of her. So I think it's a natural instinct to try to protect yourself against something that's bigger and scarier. And it'd be kind of like, sitting there looking at a bear face to face and realizing it can rip you in half. Whether it's going to do that or not is another question. So I think that mentality of instant fear, oh God, I'm probably going to die, is probably a huge factor in people's denial of it, other than the fact that they just don't look like us. And because they don't look like us, we constantly try to think that they are something they are not. And when you start tracking them, I went to a zoo to try to understand their cross trailing, which looks like a human pathway. I mean, a gorilla pathway is just the same as a walking trail. It's just a wide little path that you make because your feet scuff the ground up. The only difference is the angles and positions that their trails go in are much more like deer trails, but not because they cross deer trails. So the pathways aren't the same as bear, for instance. Bear have a tendency to make a wider path, and they stick to flatter ground typically. These guys have a tendency to make, trails up ridgelines and stuff. And when you start realizing that you're tracking a human, then you can find the evidence that you're after. Because then you know that you've got to look for an area where you're using tools, an area where you're foraging, an area where there might be a good trapping location, because they do build traps, and you can find those. And then you've got your bed systems, and that's where it gets tricky. When you're trying to go into their bed systems and you follow that front foot path, indigenous people used to hide their numbers going to their homes by walking one foot in front of the other in order to, hide whether it's one individual going down that path or 20 all following each other. They do the same thing. So when you follow pathways like that, you're heading straight into their bed systems, where there are children, where there are their elderly, and where there are sick ones. Not a place that you want to be if you are unfamiliar with their behavior. A lot can go wrong in that situation. If you're wanting to get into a bed system, do it when they are not in it. You're going to have to figure that out. So there are times during the day that they will not be in their bed systems. Usually in the afternoons, when 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock, they're usually out eating in a group together and they're not in their bed. If you know where the bed system is, during that time you can tend to get in there relatively safely. You might have to deal with one or two individuals knocking and warning about you, but other than that, you're not going to have a group of them, and you'll be able to examine the area. Typically, depends on what you're, after. If you've got Skookum or Guanch or Yeren, you're all going to have different things. Like Yeren have beds that look kind of like a big cornucopia horn with a hole. Like if they're in the desert, they'll have a hole in either end, according to my grandmother, which I've never seen a bed like that yet. Or they'll have a basket that looks kind of like a big sleeping bag, like a mummy bag, and it's just woven branches, and it's usually filled with like bark or moss to, bed it down so that you've got some comfort to it. And it'll have a single hole in one end that they can crawl in and out of, and that's usually on the ground. But you will also find those same types of beds in trees, which is that nest that I was showing you. They'll do that, like bear people will go up trees and make a huge bed of woven material that they allow to grow together, and it will have a hole in one end, according to my grandmother. I've only found the one. I've never crawled into it, because I've never found a time that it's not occupied. But if a drone or a little camera that could go up that flipping tree system, that would be pretty cool. I'd like to see inside of it. And then, how they get up the trees. That's the same. They probably crawl up the same. But that particular bed system's on private property, and I don't have permission to go take a look at it. I have to look at it from the other side of the little lake. What do you call the area where they separate the bones and pile them up? You mean like the little video that I showed about the drowned child, or are you talking about bone piles with markers on them? Because I have found one place where there were bone piles with markers, but that was up in Washington on one of the reservations. And I don't think I was dealing with what you call a Bigfoot. I think I was dealing probably with a gugway, because it liked to sneak up on you like a cougar all the time. And it would make piles of bones. And it'd be like deer bones with, let's see, raccoon bones, deer bones. Let me think what else I found. Some dog bones in there, some cat bones, because there were neighborhoods in the area. I think I found fox bones, possum bones, juvenile bear bones. I think those are all the types of bones that I found. And then I found a bone marker on top of it indicating that that pile of bones belonged to somebody. So if it isn't like where they've been eating and throwing the bones, it might also be a collection of bones that they are using for trading. Both of those are possibilities. The ones that I found, I don't believe were for trading, because there didn't seem to be any interaction with the individual that was making the piles of bones. Maybe it was an individual that was, not allowed to be around groups. Sometimes they will shun an individual that doesn't behave well. And that one was very precocious. He liked to try to sneak up on you when you're out there. So, we always carried something boom boom wise to make sure he stayed off of us. That, and there were a lot of bear and cougar in that area, so you just had to have a boom boom stick with you for general safety, period. And an instance where I've seen bones in a different way, I found a ridgeline, had a, what was it, witch hazel tree. And the witch hazel tree had little tiny skulls. Rat skull, squirrel, possum, raccoon, again a cat, fox, marten, mink, muskrat, I think a beaver skull if I remember right, and some small, like, fawn skulls were also all placed in this witch hazel tree. Typically, the individual had snapped a small branch off and then placed the skull on the brainstem point on the little branch to show it off. Some of them were just sitting, like on the bigger branches, they would be sat on the bigger branch, or in the Y of a pair of branches would be some stuck, and then there were some at the base of the tree. And what I discovered about that one was that was the old woman's son, and he was about maybe 4 or 5, so he wasn't quite of marriageable age. They don't consider themselves adult until they turn 8. So he was wanting to get married early, and he was trying to show off his hunting prowess. So he was decorating his tree with skulls to show all the young women, "This is how good you're going to eat if you're with me. You know, I can catch all these things and I'm only 5," kind of thing. So you'll come across behavior like that too, potentially, that's bone related. And then, having rib bones laid out in kanji, I've seen that a lot. And sometimes they'll even be smaller animals. And some of the behavior you might think it's, let me think, porcupine-like. Because porcupine, they'll chew on bones. But so do some of the cryptids. So you have to be careful and choose, you have to pay attention to the bite pattern. Does it have 2 front teeth, 2 incisors, and canines? You're dealing with a human. If it's got fangs and what have you instead, then you're dealing with an animal. So, bite patterns too are relevant on things, especially when you're looking at, bitten wood. Always look for fangs. If it's a bear, you're going to find fangs. If it's a dogman, you'll find fangs. If it's a skookum, guanch, oma, etc., you're going to have canines, not fangs. Well, let me think. Jinjin, I think she said she was 5 or 6 when she started having her menses. So, if that holds true, then they're able to reproduce somewhere around age 5 or 6, which puts them into the category of pygmy humans, because pygmy humans can reproduce at the age of 6 to 8 and live an average of 50 years. So if Bigfoot is able to reproduce at age 5 or 6 and lives 70, 80 years, that still puts them in our ballpark, as it were. Not in the fact that they have hips that allow them to walk habitually upright. Every book that I've ever looked at biologically says anything that habitually walks upright is a human, just like anything with a chin is a human, because we're the only animal that has a chin other than Bigfoot. Gorillas don't have a chin. Monkeys don't have chins. So we have chins, and, Bigfoot has chins. That kind of puts them again in our family group. That, and, all the stories of them being able to reproduce with us, gorillas and chimpanzees can't do that. Have you ever come across giant footprints like 42 inches long with as much up to 8 toes? When I asked them about this, they said it was the old ones. I have some more information on this. Yeesh. That's not good, dude. My native grandmother claimed that there were several species of giants from very ancient times. Some of them had died out, supposedly, but there were up to 10-toed individuals on this planet at different points in time. And we probably haven't found any bones of them yet, but, lore-wise, there are stories of things like troll-like creatures. In the Native American myths, there are other giants that have more toes. Um, it's a possibility. And their tracks should be quite large. The individual sun-faced person that I saw that was, I think he had 7 toes on his feet, if I remember right. And I think his footprint was like 24 or 25 inches long and about 18 inches across. But he was scraping about 13 and a half, 14 feet, maybe 15 feet. I saw him sitting down, and then he walked off maybe 20, 30 feet, jumped down about 200 feet off a cliff. That's the other thing. These guys can drop, like a gorilla can drop 30 feet and not break their feet out of a tree. I've seen some of these guys drop at least 80 feet out of a tree and not break a bone. So when you hear huge thump, yeah, it might be one of these guys dropping out of a tree. And you also have to think, if your ground is shaking, 800 pounds, 900 pounds, that's half a ton. That's half an average car weight. Yeah, ground's going to shake. And the lungs, they're going to be the size of, your front seats in your car when you think about it. So sounds are going to, like, rattle your bones, especially if it's like the lower auditory megahertz sounds. You feel like your body is shaking. Your bones in your flesh are freaking shaking when they roar next to you that way, or when they belt you with the non-hearable stuff. Your body vibrates. You fucking feel that shit. Pardon my language, but you do. You feel it. You feel like you're on a shake plate. And your lungs shake. You feel your internal organs shaking when they yell at you and they're that close. It's a very weird feeling. For Genevieve Forest, their growth cycle, as far as I understand, are quite different than humans. Yes. What I noticed when I found some that had children, like, I part pardon me. Part of my focus when I was up in Washington was to try to find babies and see how quickly they developed. So from birth to about 4 months, and they typically are able to stand. And that is very much like a gorilla. So they get their strength pretty quick. They will habitually still stay on the ground a lot for another 6-8 months before they are actually up and walking regularly. But they, whereas we're 6-8 months old before we start standing and trying to, balance, it's at 4 months for them. And I did some research. Growth pattern wise, they seem to be born very small. Babies seem to be much like my mother. She was very midget. She was a midget, actually, until she was a glandular midget until she had her tonsils taken out and then she grew. But she was 4 pounds, 5 pounds. Lowland gorilla babies and the growth pattern of guanche seem to be very similar. So the babies are 4 or 5 pounds and they're very tiny. They're only, a foot to 15 inches in length and maybe as much as 18 inches in length, so they're not a very big baby. And then they develop very quickly. They bulk up, their muscles develop rather quickly, and they get the ability to stand much sooner than we do. And an average size 3-4-year-old will be 5.5 feet in height. Again, that is very much like lowland gorillas in their development. So the best match I found for at least guanche's developmental rate is lowland gorilla. Not the upper or mountain gorillas, but lowland gorillas. And some of their behaviors also cross a bit that way, like the chest beating sort of thing. That's still very similar. But again, that's not their animalistic sounds are not the majority of their communications. But they seem to use their animal sounds more like trail talking or trail communication. Well, guanche can be uh, 4 or 5 feet across, as so can sun-faced people. Any of them that get large can. Depends on how tall these guys are, though, Justin. Because my guanche father, he was about 10 foot tall, and he was probably 4.5, almost 5 feet across in the shoulder. Jen Jen, she was roughly 9 or 9.5 feet in height, but she was an Oma with more chimpanzee, and her shoulders were not as wide. She was maybe 3.5, 4 foot across in the shoulders, though she was tall, almost as tall as him. There's only about a foot difference, 6, 8 inches. But sitting down and seeing them side by side, he was half again as wide as she was. So I think that certain cryptids, certain types of cryptids, have a tendency to bulk up wider in the shoulders. Um, like the Skookum woman. Sorry, my nose is really plugged today. I something in my van I'm allergic to. I've been out cleaning it. Just can't breathe yet. The Skookum woman that I was around, uh, that was in the sequoias, her shoulders were probably 4.5 feet, and she wasn't all that tall. She was maybe 8 and 8.5 feet tall, but she was very square in the body. She was bigger than Patty, and Patty looks like she was probably 9, 10 foot tall. But the Skookum woman looked like she probably had a good 6, 8 inches in the shoulder width on Patty. So I think some of them, either due to their location, their diet, or their species, might actually have wider shoulders, more gorilla-like shoulders than some of the other species of them, like the Janoskwa, the Ishka. They have a slenderer shoulder, and they are not as tall. At least not the ones here. They seem to average 4. Yeah, I'd say probably they're females, 4 or 5 foot, maybe as much as 6, but not so much. The females seem to be smaller. Their males seem to range 5, 6 foot. So they're far more in the human height category, at least here. I don't know about others in other areas, and I don't know if the term matches the same face. Because that's the other thing I'm noticing is there's a lot of loss of the understanding of what these things look like in association with the names. The concept of Sasquatch and Bigfoot have become a really generalized term for what these things are, and we need to actually be a little more specific because you can't categorize them that way. They're not all the same, nor do they look the same, nor do they act the same. So there are characteristics that are different between each type, each species. And I do think they're species. I don't think they are all the same species. I think they are separate species. So to say you're going to find one creature and call it Bigfoot, okay, well how about the other half dozen that are out there that aren't it? But they're also unknown species. Because I look at these things just as unknown, uncontacted species, be they a human or something else. And there are historic accounts of all kinds of things. Dog people, the dogmen here, their shoulders don't seem to be as wide. They seem to have a more sloped forward shoulder, and they seem to be narrower. And their junk is like a dog's junk. They actually look more like a upright walking dog than anything else, but they have a lot of the same. They can make a whoop sound. They still use their hands, though their hands are like raccoon hands. They still use them very much like a human's hands. They still use tools. So There's something odd about that because the mentality is way too smart to be just a normal upright walking dog of some kind. Normal, haha, funny term there. Okay, got a question, Sky. For those of us who have picked up the heart rocks, what else do we need to know? Your information about what heart rocks mean really resonated with me. Well, I have made the mistake of picking up a heart rock because I didn't understand it quite yet. And you mean I had been told that they were for the departed loved ones. I didn't realize at first that, being a kid, you get told stuff and that doesn't always click that what Uncle Ong said about his species might also be relevant to a completely different species. So now that I'm an adult and realize that pretty much all cryptids use a heart shape as a gift for, you're my partner. When I was living around the Dogman, I picked up a heart-shaped rock there, and he now follows me. Not everywhere, not all the time, but he will wherever I move, whenever I move. He'll make a point of coming by, making sure that I know he's around, and I can always identify him because he has electric blue, freaking nighttime eye shine, and he's got a very familiar. Uh, I'm familiar with his movement and what he looks like and where he will sit. So he'll come find me every few months. He's even come to my work a couple of times, but he doesn't hurt me in any way. Occasionally he'll say a word now and again. Uh, so they don't seem to get overly attached to you. It's not a sexual thing for them when you pick up a heartstone. It seems more like if they've left one for you, they regard you as somebody that they respect and love and that they will protect you. At least that's the impression I've gotten so far. And that, I picked that rock up 5 years ago. And I've seen him maybe 4 or 5 times since then. So he's not hounding me, so to speak, in any way. But, he does check up on me. So that's something to consider. But also you might be picking up somebody else's stone. Keep that in mind too. And then as far as them migrating, you're not seeing migration. What you're seeing is trade routes. The ones here run hilltops and ridgelines, and they run north, south, and east, west. There are items that I've found traded from the coast. I've seen fresh crab here in the valley that shouldn't be here. I've seen sagebrush brought over from Central Oregon. Shouldn't be here because there's no sagebrush in this valley. So you might find food sources that are out of place. Seafoods are traded along a very old native route, and that's familiar to me. I was told about it, and it runs right through the Janoskwa area where the Ishka live. And it was part of the trade route system my mother showed me, and when she showed me where the Janoskwa were, she said, oh yeah, they guard this upper pass of the trade route. And I asked, well, what do they guard against? And she said, so things that bother the Bigfoot. And I'm like, oh God, what would bother the Bigfoot? Because they're pretty big. And my mom always say, oh, there are bigger things out there. There are different things. My grandmother, too, would always say, there are far more ancient things left in this world than we might realize. So, you may not be dealing with an upright walking cryptid like we think of as a Bigfoot. You might also be dealing with something else. Because recently I found some tracks I can't quite explain. They look almost like a camel track. They're not a moose track, not an elk track, and they got 3 pads. I'm going to have, and that's down by Cottage Grove Lake. I found 2 scuff prints, and they're not clear enough to get a good picture of or a good cast of, But I've got to go back down and see if I can find that again, because either it's some sort of a weird overlay print and I'm misreading it, or it's something, an object that's maybe being sat on the ground, and I don't know what it is, or it is a track of some kind that I don't know what it is, but it's very funny looking. So I'll see if I can come up with another one. I've seen two in the last 4 years. But whatever it is, it's probably waterborne, because it's always, I never see it go into the forest anywhere. It just comes up and goes back into the water. So I'm guessing that whatever it might be is water related, but there's nothing recorded in that lake. Cottage Grove Lake doesn't have any kind of swimming cryptid as far as I am aware of. There's never been anything sighted down there. So I don't know. Maybe it's a deformity of some kind, or maybe growth. Maybe the individual has tumors or some sort of bone deformity that has calcified. I don't know. And I won't know until I can find more of those tracks. Do they call themselves the sun-faced people? And what's the best way to determine if that's what you're dealing with? Okay, my Native American grandmother called them sun-faced people because they have pink coral-colored skin. Their flesh tone is more like a sunburnt look. So a dark color skin. It'll be similar to that color, or more like salmon colored. So very pinkish looking, like a really sunburnt person. And they are not to be trusted, according to my grandmother. I dealt with two groups of sun-faced people during my turnout. One of smaller stature and more really, really human looking in the face. Very thin faces, very thin necks, very pronounced chins. Very, very human in the face. Not a lot of facial hair. And very cunning. They, according to my grandmother, if they ever try to compromise you, steal something from you and compromise you, or lead you into an area where they will assist you out, and they offer their hand to help you, don't take it. Because the sun-faced people supposedly will hold you prisoner. They will make you into a slave. They might you if you're female. And otherwise, they'll use you as a workhorse. They are cannibalistic, supposedly. So when you wear out, they'll just eat your ass, so to speak. That's a possibility. And the other group that I had to deal with were bigger. They still had the light-colored skin instead of the gray skin, like most Guanche and what have you. Now, some Yeren have paler skin. And Jen, she had modeling across her face because she had skin tone mixed with her gray face tone. So there are the possibilities you might find them all. Some of them may also have human-like skin tone, which is kind of rare, but it does occur. But when you're dealing with sun-faced people, it's what we native call them. I don't know their name for themselves. We call them that because of the tone of the coral tone to the face. So the ones up top of that ridgeline, because I've dealt with ones that were down in a river area and in a ravine with a box canyon, and then the others were up on a ridgeline, and behind that ridgeline was this massive gnarl of old scrub that was all grayed out, nothing but, old toppled trees, and just, you can't get through there unless you're crawling on logs. Now, I tried to go down there and tried to follow the bigger individual that I'd seen, because I saw him more than once on my turnout, and I couldn't get in more than maybe 60 feet without them coming up on me and starting to growl and starting to get territorial. So you might want to be careful around those kinds of creatures. I'm not sure of their behavior, other than the little bit of behaviors that I came around on my turnout. But the more human-like, shorter group, not the ones that were scraping, 12 to 15 feet in height, they would come into town. They would come to our home. They tried to disassemble our home by stealing tools from our tool shed to take our home apart with. Not normal behavior for an animal. So they are incredibly smart, and they will try to trick you, manipulate you, scare you, etc. I, I I don't know enough about them though, other than that they were far more aggressive than anything else I've been around, other than dogmen, or gugway. So in my head, they're on that opposite end of the list for being friendly with. But if you happen to have good luck with it, by all means, just be really careful. Don't don't make any mistakes. Okay, and how can I keep my phone from being zapped by them, as it takes the power away from my phone and my ability to take pictures? There is actually the EMP shielding that you can buy for a phone. I've often thought might work to shield a phone from them, because I think they're hitting it with their lower sounds. I think they're doing that low vibration, and it's just knocking out the battery on stuff. I could be wrong on that, but it might have an EMP effect. I mean, it does befuddle your brain when they hit you with the subsonic sounds. So it might also do that to your battery. So maybe EMP shielding, a little metal pouch that you can use, foil pouch. I think you can order them. I'm not sure if it would work. I'd be interested in knowing. I've learned just to ask them not to do that. And so far I've had pretty good success. That, and I've learned how to make sure I have a charger with me that doesn't fail. And that's usually left at the vehicle. So, if I'm out there, I can at least go back, recharge, and go right back out. You do those sorts of things. Or if you've got a handheld camera, carry a second battery and make sure that it's shielded in some way. Bluish skinned. What color hair do your bluish skinned ones have? Because there were accounts in native lore of dog people and other kinds of cryptids that had bluish skin, not gray or charcoaly, but more like the tone of robin egg blue or navy blue. And I would be very interested in information on those guys. And I've also heard that there are some red-skinned crawlers somewhere in this area, out in the Oak Ridge area, and I have not seen them. I've heard about them, and the big white one, there's a big white cryptid. It's an upright walker up in Oak Ridge, Fall Creek area, and that was one that my mother was familiar with. She'd seen that thing, because she used to live after World War II, and there are quite a few stories from loggers and whatnot about cryptids up there. Ones are white ones that have fair skin, ones that have more toes than normal. There's some oddities in this entire valley area, actually, and surrounding mountain ranges. You can find all kinds of bizarre stuff. If you just go out far enough, you can get some really bizarre stuff, like upside down baskets woven, and beds on the ground that are just look like piles of brush until you get up on them and you realize you can crawl inside of them, because they're actually big woven structures sitting on the ground. That happens up north a lot in this valley, around Lower Portland area, Oswego area, all around that area. You'll find stuff on the ground that are beds. And then you get further up in the mountains and you start finding, upside down woven baskets that they use as shelters. So, and then down here in the valley, you get, the bed systems up in the trees that are, big bed systems that are woven together in branches. So, they're probably different cryptids acting in different ways, but wherever they habitually are is where you're going to find those kinds of evidence. And that's probably going to hold true no matter where you go. I'm thinking about one of your past videos where you are come across a blue eye. Yep, I've seen these things, but blue lines underneath their eyes, on their cheeks, with white, which I think was ashes. Interesting. Because the dog man that I lived near, at night, he always, to me, looked like he just had a black face. I didn't ever see anything different. And he seemed to be a little more bald in the face and haired like a normal dog. And then when I saw him during the day, he did have real fine hair all over his face. But it was sparser, and I didn't see the coloration except for the one time. And I couldn't tell if he was like blushing in the face or if he had face paint. Because at first I thought it was a painted mask. And so I'm like, oh wow, that's a really cool Native American mask. People, artists have been on that property and they throw shit away. Now, dog man sleeping, you leave him the heck alone because he might attack you if you touch him. Either, and he kind of looked like he'd do, and he kind of looked like he tried to decorate himself up to look like a predator, if that makes any sense. Because it's kind of what struck me. And then he blinked. I was like maybe 18 inches away from touching him because I didn't, it was still in my head. I was looking at the colors and thinking, oh, that's a freaking really cool mask. And I was reading, and I almost took him, but he started looking a little perturbed at me, so I figured in that location I could get up on him again pretty easily. I mean, he got so familiar with me that he would sit on the other side of my tarp where I had because my chin on the other side of the tarp. So, unfriendly, friendly neighbors. And yes, yeah. Alrighty. So yeah, some of them are cannibalistic. Cannibalistic. The sun-faced people, the Gugway, I know for sure are cannibalistic. There are a couple of other species that are cannibalistic. Giants, six-toads sometimes are cannibalistic, usually are, or others with more toes. And I don't know a lot about them because I haven't done any research on them. All I have are legends and stories. But there were quite a few different groups that are more cannibalistic. So keep that in mind when you're doing research. Make sure if you're trying to research something like that, you stay far enough away from them that that's not going to be a problem. Otherwise, I would say stick to the more human ones that aren't as cannibalistic because I don't want anybody disappearing simply because they've been too curious around somebody that might eat. Answer more on that than they've done. And it's to my car before they told me they can hear the sounds of the electrical components of the phones. Yeah, their hearing. If my hearing is any indication of their hearing, they've got some really excellent hearing. Every time I go in for a hearing test, I usually have to let them know you don't need to recalibrate your machine for the third time. I really do hear down to 152 megahertz, and yes, I really do hear up to 32,000 megahertz. So my hearing is incredibly good compared to most humans. So if and the kana that my uncle Ong gave was set as to my hearing range. He didn't hear. He said there was no point in teaching me a language that I could not speak because I didn't have the subsonic sound box or that I could hear. So there's a certain set of range. I'm sure they can hear their lower tones, and I'm sure they can hear their louder tones. Have my hearing, my vision. I can't do my voice anymore because my voice box is broken. But I do have a recording of my voice box. At one point in time, I was able to scream at 26,442 hertz. And there is a voice recording somewhere in this town of the individual who kept it for me. It was actually done because he had 20-foot tall speakers in the area, and he put them on public display at the fair, and he was asking anybody to scream into the microphone and pop his speakers because they were 30,000 hertz. Or 20,000 hertz, excuse me. So I stepped up and made him pop. That freaked him out, and his eyeballs popped. He was like, "Don't go anywhere! Don't go anywhere! You stay right here. I've got sound recording going. I want to know if I caught that." So he went back into the booth and double checked, and yeah, I had definitely popped his speakers. I topped him out, and he'd gotten a recording of the caliber of my voice, and he asked if he could keep it, and I told him yes, because I wouldn't want to lose it, and I'd like to have it, if he ever kept it as part of his, you know, overall research or study on sounds, please keep it in that repository, and he said he would, so it's somewhere locked in a safe here in town, and I don't remember his name. I got to talk to a friend of mine who actually knows the guy. Maybe I can recover that sound recording, or maybe have him make it public at some point. But there's that. So if my voice can do that, then what can their voices do? How many thousands of cycles can they go above what we can even hear? Jet black to auburn. Huh. That's the one with the blue. I'm very interested in that. That makes me very curious. I'm probably wearing face paint, unless, there is, in Mongolia, there were stories of auburn-haired individuals that had blue faces like the Bora people. And that they would have, slightly lighter color around their eyes and sometimes around their mouths, which is very much like blue-faced monkeys, which kind of is interesting to think about. Because it seems like there's an odd mix between the animalistic characteristics of their bodies and then their very human mentality. Makes me think that they've probably been here way longer than us. We might actually be a sport species. We might be like a mule that can reproduce and related to them in some way. Or they have way more relations to their environment. They've adapted and stayed environmentally adapted, which would probably make them one of the longest lived species on the planet if we can ever discover them. Oh, haha. Well, I found out my appendix was functional because I accidentally poisoned myself when I was 24. And I went to the doctor because my digestive tract had shut down. And it was then that I found out that I survived the poisoning because I have a working appendix. And so did my grandmother, and so did my mother. There are things I can eat that you can't. I can eat fuchsia berries. I can eat, I hate to say it, nightshade. It doesn't bother me. My grandmother used to eat nightshade berries all the time, fuchsia berries too, and she'd go to the extent, because she'd been around the air, and she'd eat freaking iris bulbs. You have to soak those for 24 hours before they're edible for us. with a working appendix, not able for you guys to do this, so don't. It will kill you. But then again, there's a percentage of Native Americans, about 14 to 20%, depending on tribe, also have working appendixes. So that's a medical trait that they don't let out about Native Americans. It's one of those different genetic factors that the medical community likes to keep from everybody else. Just like the fact that pygmies are sexually mature at 6 to 8 years of age and can produce children. You don't hear about that in your regular textbooks. You have to go dig for that kind of information. Oh yeah, mental can. That's something else I kind of wondered about. When people talk about mind talking or mind speaking with these things, I'm kind of wondering if it might be a case where they're using like a subsonic or lower tone sounds and you're able to read the emotion of it and your brain translates it into language. Now, I'm going to tell you a story why I think that is possible. And I'll only use the person's first name, Suda. And she was an individual who is in American medical texts with this particular condition. So Suda was a family friend of ours that I met when I was young. Grandmother introduced me to her. She was born with no cochlea in her ears at all. She had no sensory organs at all in either ear from birth. She could understand her name. She could hold a conversation with you by feeling the vibration of your voice on her skin. She also was a pianist. The first time her parents ever took her to a concert, a piano concert, she felt the music, is what she said. She could feel it on her skin. So when she came home, she sat down at the piano and she played the entire play, the entire thing that she'd just heard. She also turned out to have, without any hearing, perfect pitch and tone when she was dealing with playing music. She could distinguish a sharp note from a flat note. She'd also tune her own piano. Then she would stand over anybody who tuned her piano and tell them, yeah, not right. So if we can do that, and there are also people who, like there's a man in Japan, he was born blind, but he can see colors, he can feel them, and he can sense an object and then replicate it on a canvas accurately to color. He can paint a vase full of flowers and get the placement correctly, though he cannot see. So I think part of what we think is mind speaking is not necessarily telepathy. It might be sensing emotion or sensing language that's not auditory for us, but we can still pick it up. Possibility. Don't know how much science can say about that, but who knows. Okay. Let me see if there are a few more questions. Okay, with this sensitivity thing, if you have the ability to sit and practice with a friend, use the three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. One of you sits there as a receiver, meaning you're trying not to think about anything. You're just receiving what the other person's thinking. And then the initiator individual thinks of one color. You clearly have to be able to picture the color in your head. Yellow, for instance. And then, without talking to each other, the receiver has to be able to tell what the projector, individual projecting the color that they're thinking about. That is a way to practice that might help you get some of that more emotional feeling and more a recognition, mental recognition as to sensing things. There's another exercise that can be done that helps you build telepathic abilities. So take a deck of cards. You take all of the face cards out at first because it's really difficult to deal with face cards. You set the deck, face down, shuffle them really good. You take your first card off the top, you leave it face down, and then you just figure out if you're seeing the color black or red, and then flip your card over, and if you've got, the correct color, you're sensing it correctly. Now, this is also probably parts of the trainings that you would consider if you were dealing with, your chi. You're extending your energy in order to sense a thing. It's a way of thinking about it. Once you can get to a point where you can turn, every card over, follow your instincts. The first color that comes into your head's the right one. If you think red and then change your mind, it's black. No, it was red. And same, other way around. Oh, it's black, no red. No, it was really black. So it's also training you to trust your instincts, which is something you really need when you're out in the woods. So those are two exercises that might help. And once you get burst at it, throw your face cards in, and they won't confuse you anymore, and you'll be able to pick them out too. If you can manage to read an entire deck all the way through, you'd probably be qualified to go into some sort of spook organization. Okay. Ah! Let me... I have a reason because I am... Hey, Genevieve. Yeah. The reason I asked is because I'm Aboriginal Australian with a few different biological features. Really? How did you find out that your appendix? Do you also have a working appendix or eyes that are unusual? Because I have unusual hearing. I have better than normal eyesight. I also have independently focusing eyes. So I can focus one eye on an object 10 feet away from me and I can focus the other eye 1,000 yards out and I can see both images clearly, which is very unusual. People don't have that. I've only ever met two other people in my lifetime that had that, my father and one of my coworkers uh, from years ago. And then, the hearing. I also have a better sense of smell. Like, I can smell orchids, and I can distinguish in a hothouse of 30,000 orchids which one bloomed that day. And I verified that with a friend of mine who used to keep orchids, and I'd go over and he never understood that I loved the smell of his orchid house until one day I'm like walked in and I forgot. People don't smell orchids. I forgot. And I said, "Oh wow, it smells really great in here. What bloomed?" Not thinking about what I was saying. And he turns around and he goes, "Only one plant bloomed today, but there's no way you can know that. You can't smell orchids. People don't smell orchids." I'm like, "Oh, I smell orchids." And there are actually a few people around the world that can smell blooms of orchids and can smell the yeast pattern of them blooming. Like there are people from the Mideast, or quite a high number of people actually from the Mideast that can smell orchids. Some Native Americans can smell orchids, and some Aboriginal people can smell orchids. Now, what my friend was able to tell me was that I managed to smell an orchid that only had one pheromone bulb. And the pheromone bulb on that particular orchid is only on the root system. So he asked me, he says, "What does it smell like?" I said, "It smells like dirty vanilla to me, like soil and vanilla. Like you just poured a bunch of vanilla on dirt." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, it smells great. It smells like dirty vanilla." And he's like, "There's no flipping way." So he actually went to somebody that he knew that dealt with unusual species and dog training and scent acquisition, because your animals will go through certain kind of characteristics during scent acquisition. Like typically dogs will, when they first, anyway, I'll get onto that in a second. So anyway, what he discovered was that I smelled about 10 times, had the ability to smell about 10 times better than a dog, because dogs don't have as much of a scent acquisition as I do somehow. And that was interesting information to discover. So there are, I'm assuming, quite a few probably nations or characteristics Aboriginal people or people around the world may have, hearing wise, scent wise, taste wise, vision wise, maybe even unusual strength, or like my uncle, maybe they will still have their planter's tendons and can pick up the front end of a vehicle with one hand, which he could. It's very peculiar to see. And then, with those things in mind, what did we really descend from? Because if we're getting all of these different characteristics from different people in different parts of the world, then we didn't descend from one Lucy. We probably descended from several different kinds of creatures, primates. Or maybe we are our own spur. Maybe we are a sport in some kind that actually was viable. And we are the only primate on the planet that doesn't have body hair all over us. We're, other than a few bonobos and chimpanzees that have come out hairless, we're the only hairless primate on the planet. Doesn't that make you wonder? Why is it that we're hairless if we are like every other primate? And what is that characteristic that flips that? Well, if you're looked into Melba Ketchum's work, you will discover that there is an allele switch on a chromosomal pattern on the sixth allele set. So the Bigfoot have a counter exchange allele set in that area, and they have hair and we don't. I mean, just not as thick. So we are still haired, it's just we're naked haired. We don't have as thick a hair as they do. And they have, the Omai was around, the one that looked like chimpanzee, she had an undercoat, so she actually had a pelt, not just hair like we have, but, a secondary pelt like a mink has, an insulator coat, and then she had guard hairs. And when you find, your hair samples, typically you're finding guard hairs with no root bulb, or you'll find a slip hair, or excuse me, the other way around. So the insulator hair you'll find with no bulb, but your guard hairs will have the bulb. That's how it goes, a root ball. So typically you're going to be finding the undercoat, which is not the same kind of hair structure. Those hair structures are usually hollow in most animals that, like sea otters, mink, that sort of thing. Ferrets, they all have that undercoat that's an insulator coat. Wolves have it too. Anything that's Arctic has it. Anything that's aquatic that has a fur-bearing pelt has that quality, and typically will also run into clear hair strands because it's like gray hair for us, or hollow hair, because that all works as insulator either in water to keep you from getting too cold. Otherwise, you'd have to have a very thick fat layer, or you're dealing with Arctic temperatures where you're, going to have to live in 50 below zero. So you better have a parka or an insulator of some kind that's going to protect you from that. And that's what why the hair is developed that way in those species. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure if this is true or they're messing with me, but they told me that Eve is their mother. No, they're not messing with you. Eve was an Oma woman, and her husband was a dog man, according to Oma legends. I don't know how true that is, but you just basically told me the same thing that my adopted Oma mother told me. Jen Jen. That's interesting. I never expected to hear that out of anybody else. Thank you, Justin. You just gave me an answer to a puzzle I thought might not be true. Did your Uncle Ong happen to mention anything about rock pyramids here in America? Oh, yeah, he said that before Pangea broke up, there were pyramids all over the place, and that they didn't collapse or dissipate once Pangea started breaking up. Just those cultures drifted apart with them, and they either continued to use those structures or they died out or changed their patterns of living and moved away from their cities. But those were originally supposedly pyramidal cities from all over Pangea, and that's why they're on all 7 continents. Yeah, psychic ability. Yeah, um, they do seem to practice. They meditate a lot, at least Oma do. Um, my Oma mother, Jen Jen, she would meditate every day. And she would hum sometimes in circle breathing while she was meditating. And it was during that time doing circular breathing like you do for a didgeridoo, to play a didgeridoo. You're always drawing air in, always blowing air out. It was during that time when she'd be humming and sitting in the sun, she'd appear as if she were see-through. She'd look like she disappeared. I mean, you could still see like the shimmer of her there, but until you got up on her, you couldn't really see her. And I don't know if it was just her kind of, you know, calibrating her energy maybe to her physical being, or maybe the sound that she was making had something to do with her transparency level, like an up-down switch, a tuner. I don't know. Um, but it was interesting to see, and caught her doing that more than once. But I could walk up to her and touch her, and she'd come out of it, and you'd still see her. She hadn't gone anywhere. She just appeared to disappear, but she was still physically there. She hadn't gone to another realm. She hadn't stepped through another dimension. It's just she looked all more like she was a painting on glass all of a sudden. Not quite the same. And I have had some very strange encounters up in Washington where I swear to God, some child was practicing disappearing and jumping out of a tree to his mother. And he was a very young child, too. Couldn't have been more than about 20 or 30 pounds in weight and maybe 2 months old. And he was climbing this little tiny, what was a vine maple sapling. I'd see him climb up it physically, and then I wouldn't see him in the foliage, and I would see the foliage parting as he dropped. And I'd see this kind of a smear or a blur, but I wouldn't see him. I had to sneak up on that pair. It was a mother and child, a little boy. And it took me months. I just kept trying until I finally was able to sneak up on him and actually watch them one day. And I got to see him go up the tree 4 times in a row. And he was physically climbing the tree. You could see him go up it, and then he would concentrate, and then he'd fall. And he'd jump down into mom's arms. And he was not visible. He was kind of visible. It's more like looking at the characteristics of the Predator movie and that shimmer, the disturbance in the foliage, but you don't really see them. It's more like that than actually going away, disappearing. So it's more of a shimmer effect to it. And you still see the foliage moving. So it doesn't, they're still physically there. Interesting about Siddha. I've been listening to Squatch since 1994. I hear their words in my head, but in the beginning I could tell they were really fumbling with the words. Uh, y- well, they don't speak English. They have to, digest that potentially. Found out, let's see, Sky Patterson, are you? Oh, sorry. That's between you guys. Uh, did you found out during CT scan that I have four kidneys all functioning separately? Interesting. I actually know somebody who has. Wow, you're the second person I met that has four kidneys. There's a woman I used to know that had four kidneys that were all functional. That's very interesting. That makes me wonder because the replication of organs that usually comes genetically with sportism or with having a dominant characteristic, like a dominant gene factor. So it'd be something that had to have been useful to your ancestors. Probably related to food sources, like the people in the delta regions of Egypt. Uh, they uh, they have bigger lungs, and their bodies can produce what is it uh, dioxide, the stuff that gives you depth poisoning. Their bodies can actually filter it out, and they don't get the bends. They also have the ability to hold their breath for like 15-20 minutes. So I think there are a lot of adaptations that our bodies have that probably came from either the ancient species that we came from or that we have adapted to because of the environment that we live in and the food sources that we eat. I think those are the reasons why we maybe have those functional things or we have replicas of them, more than one set. Because like cows have two stomachs. Cows have to pre-digest before they digest. So, and that's all based on their diet. Okay, okay, in Alaska, wow. Alaska, you probably got some really interesting stories up there because you have encounters with all kinds of really big cryptids up there that are Bigfoot-like. And I've heard some very interesting stories from some of my native friends from Alaska about what you guys have up there. Some of them are pretty flippin' violent and pretty heavy on the meat eater side of stuff, not so omnivorous like the guys down here. Sounds like you have strong psychic abilities and your brain can pick up on all these things. Do you think your upbringing brought these abilities out more than the average person? Well, the two little exercises I just mentioned, thinking of colors and using cards, and then also doing what was it, Mark Twain and his buddy did, trying to psychically write a letter while the other person's writing a letter. Those were all things that I was taught before I went on my turnout, because my mother claimed that I would need to have very good instincts and a very, how would she said it? My energy had to be very receptive to what I would encounter, is how she put it. So I'm assuming, it's kind of a mental chi kind of thing going on there. It's just, not per se psychicness. I think it's just, you attune yourself to sense with your energy more. And I think that's, more what when you're dealing with martial arts, you're dealing with focusing your energy, you're dealing with extending your energy or clamping your energy sometimes, in order to be undamaged when you get hit or to be able to not be thrown. You can stick yourself in place, so to speak, with your energy. So it when you're dealing with the chi factor of martial arts, it in a way changes your balance point and changes your opponent's ability to affect you because you're rooting your energy in a way that they may not be able to do, and it gives you a slight advantage in battle. So I think, if you're thinking in more ancient terms, maybe these people have developed that energy sense far better than we, because they've probably been around since prehistoric times, if Uncle Ong's stories are correct. And, we have maybe been there with them, but I don't know if we've had quite the same abilities for staying in our environment. I think we probably have had to build buildings because we are not well adapted to our environment, at least not as well as they are. Oh, yeah, I've seen. I had an apartment up in Washington that had a weird effect, and it only happened in one part of the apartment, and it was right by my back door, going into my backyard. I would see, and then people that came over, it would see and hear this too. And for a minute, I thought it was some sort of an electrical issue until I realized there was nothing in the area to have done that. Uh, but you'd hear a little pop, and then you'd see a little ball of light, like gold color, and it would just drop along the crack line of the door. So I don't know if it was something outside that I wasn't noticing, and it would happen during the day or night, so it didn't matter. Um, or if it was something inside that might have been discharging, like a speck of dust that was producing light. I don't know. I don't think that's a possibility, but something unusual was going on in that apartment. I haven't had any incident in any other place I've ever been like that, so I think it was maybe something relevant to that particular apartment. Maybe an entity or something there that I was unaware of. Well, kidneys and functional kidneys, extra sets. If you're a desert uh, people, then drinking stagnant water, if you had more kidneys, you could probably drink stagnant water and not be seriously affected by it. That might be an adaptation, actually, and a very good one if that's the case. Okay, Justin, more on the conversation about you being your mother, and I asked them if they were aliens. They said no. And more aliens they are. That no more alien than you are. Has they told we are you, and me are not from their meaning. Jin Jin's concept of it was they had evolved from the puddle, the pond, and we were all polywogs. Uh, so she understood the concept of things from other worlds, but she also claimed that she wasn't from off-world. Neither did Uncle Ong. He knew that he was originated from here, and he also had the similar concept of polywogs in the pond. And if you go back far enough in our geography and in our lineal history, and if you take it to the perspective where we're all developing in an ocean or a puddle, then yeah, polywog in a pond, and then we become landwalkers eventually. So maybe they have a slightly stronger mindset, and maybe they can retain those memories through those life forms that maybe we don't retain. I mean, most people don't remember their past lives, so I would say that would be maybe something they would be more prone to. Oh, okay, about Eve, yeah. Well, if her stories were correct, and if Uncle Ong's stories were correct, and if the Native American stories are correct, the lore,
In all three of those instances state that we came from an Oma mother and a dogman father, and that we were born hairless and with no tail, and funny looking. So maybe it's just we're another genetic spur. Maybe that's how species actually come about. I mean, we've recently discovered that bird species are reappearing back on islands that they've been extinct on for 100 years plus, and it's simply because the mycelium mat in that area is prone to produce them, so to speak. And that's a new discovery in the last, what, 3 years? So who knows what the past may have held, how life may have come forward. Maybe it fell from space and germinated on our planet from extremophiles on. Or maybe there was, something in the mud mix here that allowed life to produce. Extremophiles live in volcanoes, hot springs, incredibly cold regions, South Pole. There are extremophile mosses that live inside rocks in the South Pole. So if life can do that, I'm pretty sure we've got plenty of advantages just living on a mud ball to create all kinds of life species that will adapt to their environment and the conditions of. Um, I think my hour has turned into two, and it's getting on to. I have to consider going to work here real soon. I got to be at work at 5:30. So I think I'm going to maybe have to cut this short in the next, probably 10-15 minutes so I can get to work. But I will take a few more minutes to answer any questions, and I'm going to show you this track from a couple of different angles so you can kind of get some more understanding of its structure. So feel free to ask questions. And I'll say that you can see the different crease lines in it and the different characteristics and what it looks like overall. There was this guy did some really nice castings of this thing and gives you a real good idea of toe placement and the dirt push around it. And you can see the double crease line in your pad of your foot. And then just the overall, how the thickness of the foot pad is about a quarter to maybe a half inch in some areas. It gives you an idea of what that looks like and the overall shape of the foot and how flat they really are. And then this tagging here, the easy slope to it on the inside of the foot. That's where you'll get that kind of a cup push up when you see a print. It's this fat pushing up, and you'll get a imprint that's unclean. It'll come up like one out the lake, juvenile track. It'll have that little lip where the inner arch is, and that's all their fat pads. And then just the the general movement of this, you could tell it was walking forward. You get the suck pattern from the dirt, and there was some gravel and stuff in it, but overall what the shape of it looks like and the characteristics of it, so you have a better idea. That way, when you see that stuff out in the woods or when you see it in loam or dirt, you'll have a better idea of what you're looking at and where the heel really ends compared to the fat layer, where the fat pad is compared to the brachial arch, compared to the front of the foot and the instep, or not the instep, but the ball of the foot top area. So those are all qualities that you won't typically see in a cast. I'm really lucky, in my opinion, to have this particular cast. I'm very grateful to have received it. It is an excellent piece to show off, in my opinion. And at some point, I'll probably have to have it preserved somewhere. But for now, it's going to be my hanger on the wall. Yeah, no problem. I actually prefer having a more, face to face kind of personal approach to this because, well, it kind of has to be an informal, in my opinion, because if we sit there and we are always deferring to authority, we're only going to get the authority's opinion. If we start talking to each other and sharing this information, like I just learned today more things than I ever knew before. I've learned that there's one other person, at least, in the world that has four kidneys. That there are brown haired individuals that have lighter toned coloration around their eyes and blue tones to their face. Now, that's something historically I knew about, but I'd never met anyone who had seen one with any of those qualities on their face. So, either there's face paint or different coloration in skin. So, us being able to share direct information and the fact that you're able to find badgermen in an area, badgermen are another one that I don't know much about. I know stories about them, but I haven't tracked them much, and I haven't interacted with them much. Just like the bear people and the dog people, that's been on the back burner for me for many years. But now I've gotten more confident, after being around so many of the other more human-like ones. I'm getting it that there are some of these guys that the more human cryptids will associate with, and those are the ones I can probably get along with, and not be in fear of being taken off and eaten. So I don't think that bear people or badger men are cannibalistic because I don't see any warnings against them as far as the other more primate and humanoid-like, Oma, Watch, Skookum, and Yaren. They don't warn against certain species, just like Guanche believe that the Ishka Janoskwa are their parents. They believe that that three-toed sloth thing that I have a picture of and the Janoskwa was the three-toed sloth thing that was their parents. That was their mother, and then the father was supposedly a Janoskwa. So if that's what the Guanche come from and the Oma come from in their minds, that's where those species came from, and then we came from an Oma and a dog person. So my next question is, where the heck did dog people come from? What crossbred to create them? Because the more I see, hear, and learn, it seems like all of this is crossbreeding and throwing sports. It doesn't appear that we have a very clear understanding of our genetics, if that's correct in any way. Yeah, I'm really glad that everybody's showing up. I'm glad everybody's sharing. And if you can't get emails to me, then try to post something in your community or on your YouTube page, and I'll come look at it. No problem. And I'm very interested in understanding what else is out there because I only know about 4 or 5 species with any kind of assurity. There's a lot for me to learn because I know there's way more than 4 or 5 species of these things out there. How about the ancient alien idea of interventionism of ex- orange? Okay. Well, there are all kinds of species that have come here. Like the Hopi Indian, they fell here. They aren't really even a native when you. I mean, they are because they fell in America. But they have stories of falling out of the stars. But they look like us. They act like us. We can crossbreed with them. So there's an alien, but they didn't have high enough tech to do anything about getting off the planet once it got here. And that's their their reservation actually has parts strewn that are petrified in rock. You know, spark plugs, cylinders, solenoids, stuff like that. What looks like stuff like that, computer parts, etc. And there have been like over 1,700 rocks with things like that gathered off the Hopi Indian Reservation. Hopis are very aware that they came from another planet. They were colonists, but you know they crash landed and make it safely. The Blue Men of Morocco also say that they are from a completely different, system. They claim they're from Andromeda system, and that they're born with blue skin. So, and they're human. They look like us. They act like us. But if you look up the Blue Men of Morocco, they're very unique, and they have some very different stories about themselves. And then, you probably have those species that come here just to stock up. Maybe they're stocking up on water. Maybe it's a pass-through point. There might be some that are coming here to collect us as food. Possibilities abound. I mean, if there's life on this planet, there's got to be life on other planets. And if we're advancing, technologically wise, there got to be other planets that have done the same and maybe even more advanced than us. Dimensionally, though, I've seen some bizarre stuff on film. I don't know if it's true. Never seen it in person. I have seen one encounter visually in Central Oregon of a spaceship that was in the newspaper because everybody saw it. Like 4,000 of us saw it. And it rolled around our skies for like 2 weeks. I don't know what they were. I don't know where they were from. But that spaceship was around. Looked like a big pinwheel. And everybody in that town saw it. But I don't know as we were created by some alien species that just from the length of time that Uncle Ong claimed that some of our humanoid species have been here. He claimed that badgermen and giants were all the way back 5.5 billion years, according to his lore. That's an awfully long time, and you're dealing with acidic oceans, very volcanic ground, and sulfurous ozone and atmosphere. Whatever lived during that time would have had to have been an extremophile of some kind. So part of these cave dweller giants and stuff, they might be a form of extremophile left over from the primordial time of the creation of this planet. I don't necessarily think that they're from other worlds. I don't think that they were genetically manipulated. I don't think that they're fallen angels. I don't think that they're extra dimensional creatures. To me, they're physical creatures that are out there. I don't see any other thing going on. But then I'm not an expert, so I don't know. And yeah, our world's not exactly as we're taught. Our world is far more fluid, energy-wise, and there are far more things to this world than we are educated about, and that is for dang sure. Yeah, because the only way that we can't depend on authority to lead us in points of education. They only standardize stuff. They don't explore. Not anymore. And they got their books to consider now. They have to build everything that they talk about in the future off that framework of Darwinism. And if it slowly erodes underneath them, they're still going to try to print the same book, unfortunately. Because it's all that they know, it's all that they teach, and it's all that they want to know. They rather that you fall in line and do your little goose step for your grade than, actually go out and theorize on anything. They're more interested in you re-quoting some other previous expert, whether that expert was correct or not. And that's really kind of sad educationally because it means we aren't really discovering anything new. We're not exploring anything new. And those days of understanding our world are gone. We think we've figured it all out. Therefore, we can just mosey on and not change anything or think about anything. And I don't think that's an appropriate a way that we should be viewing our world. I think that we don't know as much as we would like to believe that we do. I think there's way more out there in areas that may not have physical ability to get into. There's probably lots of terrain that other things live in that we can't even hardly get into, that they probably are very well adapted to. I mean, we can't go where mountain goats go unless you're a vertical climber, a free climber, or a rope climber. But those little guys, man, they'll walk a 2-inch ridge line for miles and not fall off of it. So they're really adapted to it. So there've got to be other niches like that where cryptids live that we're probably not even aware of because we never go into them. You know, we maybe only ever get exposed to something like that because we have to rescue somebody out of a pit like that, or maybe a missing person and we find something like that, or uh, a vehicle goes off. It'd be an accidental area that we'd be in. It wouldn't be something that we would be trying to hike through because the terrain would be too steep. So there are plenty of areas like that all over the Northwest. And up in Washington, oh my God, the grounds up there are so vertical, and there's so many different things up there. Cryptid-wise, there's so many groups up there. It's nuts. It's like 2 or 3 times the amount as from what's here is up in Washington. And it's all over the train, I'm pretty sure of it. Yep, you're right. Economically makes your money from the forest. Well, yeah, and that's what they do with their trade goods. I mean, they trade food items a lot, and they trade particular items. They'll trade bone items, they'll trade tools, they'll trade the mothballs, and I think hides. Some very indigenous behavior. They're still doing very human-like indigenous behaviors. The products might be different because the need is different, but it's still a very similar behavior. Interesting. That is actually kind of an ancient belief. All uh, the ice wall thing. That's a very ancient belief. I wasn't aware that people still believe that, but it's interesting. There's got to be something to that kind of a belief, but it's probably more historic. It's probably more ancient times that are being referred to. Like I could imagine, living 30,000 years ago around the equator, and you have two polar caps that are, 30, 40 feet thick, if not thicker, on either side of you, you would feel that you were living in a narrow channel or on a flat piece of land between walls of ice, because you were. Well, anyway, I probably need to scram. It was great having everyone here, and no, I don't, I don't worry about what other people believe. They could be right as much as I could be right. So I don't discriminate against a person's beliefs because I wouldn't want to be discriminated against for my beliefs. And that, there's always an extension of respect because you can always learn from each other. Maybe there is some relevance to each type of story. It's just what's that relevance? And how do we understand those things and get a better picture of our history? So, you're welcome, Olaf. There are plenty of different stories all over this world. We believe in all kinds of things that are invisible, from different kinds of gods to different kinds of mythic creatures. I'm not here to judge, I'm only here to explore. And, I'm always open for learning. because there are plenty of things that I'm unaware of that I probably would like to know about, right? I think we all do. And besides, if we can share these sorts of stories and information, thoughts, and beliefs with each other, then we can paint a picture of our history, no matter whether it's been put in a book for us or kept from us. We can retain it back. We can bring it back if we are able to communicate with each other and figure out how our stories correlate to each other. Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that might actually benefit us all a little more than being given a laid out format of what everyone thinks we should know. Well, my boss believes in the ice wall. Uh, you know, so there might be. And besides, ice walls, ice is a thing that comes up very quickly anyway. I mean, you can have a flash freeze and if you're dealing with flash freeze at 70 below zeros, you snap frozen in place. So yeah, you could have all kinds of things out in the edges of our world that we don't know about. There's possibilities, all kinds. I mean, Atlantic and Pacific Ocean waters can't mix because they're two different gravities and two different qualities of temperature. So, you know, they stay completely separated, and that technically is a water wall, if you think about it. Yeah, please feel free, even in the posts, just ask questions and let me know what you want to hear about. I'm sorry, I'm very kind of stuck to like the 4 or 5 critters that I'm aware of, because I don't want to mislead you guys. I don't want to tell you inaccurate information. I'm trying to give as accurate as I can under the circumstances, because it doesn't do any good to not give you the correct information. And I think, I'm going to start letting you know when I'm going into the Dogman area. This is Dogman area. This is Dogman evidence. Now, the thing is, Dogman evidence and Skookum evidence and Oma evidence is not going to look much different. They're all going to look very similar. But maybe you'll notice something that I don't. So I'll let you guys know whenever I'm at, each time, what creatures in the area. Maybe, we can find some more correlations together. Anyway, you have a great day, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do on Saturday yet, but give me some suggestions, and I'll see what I can do. Or I'll come up with something. I've been thinking maybe a little bit more on diet, because there's quite a bit of stuff I can find at this point. I know they're stocking up this time of year, so maybe I can start focusing on, their fishing tactics and their digging tactics and their foraging tactics a little more. And maybe I can get you some more information on that. You have a good day, and thank you, everyone.